Oh shit.
Hey everybody.
We're here. Full disclosure, Michael and I thought we were live for the last 3 minutes.
I
But we
would
were not.
say 8 minutes. We went live right on the dot, Peter. Don't.
No, we were late.
No, we were late.
I'm admitting we were late.
All right.
But exciting to be here on this momentous occasion. We are of course here to celebrate and also discuss the impending imprisonment in Guantanamo Bay of Donald Trump. Guantanamo, of course, is where you put presidents who do this sort of thing.
That's right.
And
If they don't flee to a non-extradition country and plot their return to power abroad.
Now, we should, before we start discussing and giving our thoughts, describe exactly what has happened here. Donald Trump has been hit with a few charges in the latest indictment: conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights, conspiracy against voting rights. All related to the attempted coup or whatever, whatever the technicians want to call it. And we are sort of we're gonna dissect it. We're gonna talk about what exactly Donald Trump is facing in terms of prison, death penalty, whatever happens. And we're going to talk about the funniest conservative responses to this. And there are a lot, because the levels of cope on the right about this, off the charts, folks. Off the fucking charts.
Unreal levels of cope from the right. Just unbelievable.
They're so upset. The absolute funniest part about this is that, like, in a normal world, in a functioning system, this is like open and shut. Like, there's text messages, there's emails, there are witnesses from every direction, and yet we are about to be subjected to something like a year and a half, 2 years maybe, of torturous media coverage of this trial, and like whatever
it's already started.
Results. Yeah,
which we will discuss.
It's going to be a lot. But first, so Michael, I'm going to hand it to you. I think I will say that the gist of the indictment is the fake elector scheme.
That's right.
The basic idea being that in a normal presidential election, you have electors who represent each state, and they get certified, and they trot on over to Washington, D.C., and they cast their vote for whoever their state voted for. And John Eastman and company over in the Trump camp thought, hey, what if we had fake electors? Like, what if we had our own electors from each state that we lost, and sort of presented them as if they were real? And that sort of resulted in, it basically creates a gray area where senators could object during the process on January 6th. Maybe Mike Pence could opt for one set of electors over another, or declare the whole thing to be in question in some way. And their goal, presumably, was that in whatever chaos ensues, perhaps they triumph, right? Perhaps there is no transition of power, or perhaps their fake electors are counted for one reason or another.
Right.
And Donald Trump is the next president, or remains the president in 2021.
Yeah, it is roughly the scheme we described in our episode before the election the coming electoral college coup.
Yeah, we're never wrong.
No, always right. You even predicted violence on January 6th in that episode. Or no, yes, we did. That was the episode.
Just say you did. Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah. I couldn't remember if it was that or the Amy Coney Barrett episode, but it was. Yeah, so a few things stand out in this. One is, yes, the focus on the fake elector scheme. The January 6th riot and insurrection is featured in this, but it plays more of a supporting role, and we'll get into that. Obviously, until the trial and until he's convicted, everything in the indictment is just allegations, save for the stuff we saw live on TV. But if they're able to prove all the facts they set out to prove, it paints a picture of a very centralized, very centrally planned and coordinated effort on the part of the Trump administration, including people in the DOJ, to submit a slate of fake electors so that he could, take the presidency that he did not win. Right? That is the gist of the allegations.
I think I said that the electors go to DC, but that's not technically true. They cast their ballots or whatever in their respective states,
and then they're supposed to be attached to something from the governor of each state and transmitted to the vice president. This was sort of the thing that came out, which I think it was Ron Johnson maybe gave the slates from Michigan and Wisconsin, I think, to Ted Cruz to give to Mike Pence because they hadn't been transmitted to the archivist and to Pence like on January 6th or around January 6th. They're like, we got to get these fake electors to the vice president.
Dude, it's so funny that this scheme was just like, all right, there's like this electoral college process. The electors do X, Y, and Z. What if we just played pretend nearby?
Yeah.
And then said that we were the real ones. Like, would that work? And they were like, I don't know that it wouldn't work. And no one's got a better plan.
Yeah.
And this is what is like, this is sort of John Eastman's baby. John Eastman, Trump freak who used to clerk for Clarence
I was about to say Clarence Thomas clerk remains friends with the Thomases.
And he sort of concocted this scheme with the idea being this is very confusing and maybe we can confuse our way to victory.
Yeah.
And right now people are defending him on the right, like mostly true psychos, because to defend Eastman you need to be pretty far out there. But by being like, oh, so you can't float new constitutional theories now?
Meanwhile, they have like emails of his where he's like, look, we've already violated the Electoral Count Act several times today on January 6th. What would be one more minor violation of the law to delay certification for 10 days? Like literally, like after the riots, telling Mike Pence to literally violate the law.
It's so good.
It's incredible.
So good, man.
It's incredible.
I don't, there's a lot of sort of little details in the indictment that I'm sure we'll just sort of like recall as we move forward. But I do think it's worth honing in on a couple things. One of the things that jumps out in the indictment is that many people told Donald Trump and his companions, like, this is no good, guys. Like there is no evidence of fraud, and you have to stop. I mean, this is too much. So we had, and I'm probably going to miss someone here, but I'm just going to rattle off a list that I jotted down really quick. Mike Pence is like, no, there's no evidence of fraud. Senior DOJ folks say there's no evidence of fraud. Like the acting attorney general is like,
and the
no.
deputy acting attorney general, both.
Right. Director of National Intelligence, head of the DHS, and like multiple state officials. And I believe at least a couple federal Congress people or senators were like, no, we don't have any evidence. And from what we can tell, the strategy was just to ignore those people. Like Trump tells the acting deputy AG, like, just say the election is corrupt and leave the rest to me.
And your Republican congressman.
and the Republican congressman. Just like, you can't. It's a very sort of like, okay, they knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
Everyone knew that they were violating all sorts of laws. They knew that they were making, like, not quite making up a constitutional theory as much as like making a shadow government that would, sort of replace certain elements of the actual government. It's all pretty spicy, and it has made the right-wing response all the better, because the attempts to defend him are
ludicrous.
I want to say like humiliating. Yeah,
They
it's
are. They are. Oh, and I will add that they were very clearly prepared to enact violence on the population after this like fraudulent scheme was completed. And I mean, again, this has to be proven, but like at one point, Jeff Clark, who's one of the unnamed, as yet unindicted co-conspirators, he was sort of a mid-level guy at DOJ who was working directly with Trump, says something like, somebody says like, if you try this, there will be riots in every street in America. And he says, well, that's what the Insurrection Act is for, which empowers the federal government to send the U.S. Army after its own citizens.
Right.
So they're
domestic
like
deployment of the military.
Yes, domestic deployment. Have to excuse me.
My neighbor's dogs were barking right before this started, and I was like, it's about to be a dog-heavy stream between them and Michael's.
Yeah, the coyotes that live under my neighbor's shed just come and go, and the dogs get pissed.
It's fair. I'd be mad too.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks. We will be releasing Michael's dogs into the wild and then continuing with the stream.
All right. I think I'm gonna mute for a second.
I'm just gonna talk about whatever comes to my mind without censorship from Michael. I do think that the biggest single revelation, even though it's not that surprising, was the Insurrection Act line, because it is the clearest evidence that the people conspiring at the top were planning to use force on protesters if necessary after the change of power. And I think that's something that like we all knew they had in them, but at the same time, pretty wild to just see it sort of like written out with them casually discussing the murder of most of our fans, I would assume, who would be in the streets. While Michael is gone, I'm gonna talk about my. I don't want to do too much without him, but I do want to talk about my favorite responses to the indictment. First, you have the like National Review types. Like National Review posted, they're still going nuts. National Review put out a piece that was like by the editors, so like the editorial voice of National Review, not just any one writer or whatever, putting out a piece that basically said, this is a matter for the political branches, and what we should really be doing is impeaching him. And basically what happened was they failed to impeach him, And so now they're going for criminal charges, and it's just so unfair.
Yeah.
The irony being that a lot of conservatives during and after impeachment were being like, well, this is really something for the criminal courts, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's
Exactly.
always the other thing that they think should be being done. Not
Right.
to mention that it's just bizarre to think that like you can't really bring criminal charges against a former president. Like impeachment is always the proper avenue. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't really make sense. It's not something that is like actually contemplated by the Constitution or whatever. And they're just talking shit, right? They're just making
Yeah,
shit up.
yeah. I mean, Mitch McConnell said this and was
Yeah.
like, he like literally after they voted to acquit him the second time around, they said, because this isn't the proper form, and he didn't get off easy because he can still be criminally prosecuted. And then, of course, it's like a real classic bait and switch. Before an election, it's like, well, the people should just decide, and then after election, it's it's like always going to be something else, and not the avenue you want. But these laws are on the books for a reason. What he did was like plainly illegal, and yeah, some of the remedies for impeachment are good, like the inability to hold office again, and that would be good, and we wouldn't be subjected to another Trump campaign. But there are also a lot of ways inadequate, because yes, someone who organizes a coup, in my opinion, as a non-abolitionist, should be in prison. I know that's a crazy thought.
Yeah. It's a
In
right
some
wing belief of
corners.
yours.
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
reactionary belief you have. The I it's also like I don't know, if you have like any belief in institutional separation, like surely there are just some matters for criminal courts that
Yes.
don't really mesh with like the impeachment process, which is inherently political and was intended as political, right?
Some bad acts get prosecuted as crimes and then subsequently get tried as civil matters, and different parties involved, different remedies, same bad acts, right? Because that's like the way our system is set up, right? Like
Yeah.
that's pretty common actually in like assault cases, for example.
Right. Right. Now, there were a couple other objections from the right. The whole like, oh, impeachment would be better. That's like the proceduralist nerd angle.
Right.
Um, very boring, not interesting. It's like meant to sound serious. Like
Right.
it's not that you can't do this; it's that you're doing it wrong,
Yeah.
process wise. Um, the funnier argument is that this is infringing on Donald Trump's right to free speech.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Which I saw
Yeah.
like all over like dipshit Twitter yesterday and today, where they're like, "Oh, you can't say that the election was stolen. Like this is political speech, and you are trampling on his political speech." And it's like for non-lawyers, the way that conspiracy charges work is that what conspiracy is a agreement between individuals, a plot to commit a crime. So speech is involved.
Right.
To say that this would be like unconstitutional is pretty close to saying that all conspiracy charges are
Right.
unconstitutional. There was an NYU law professor whose name I continuously forget who said, I think gave an example along the lines of, you can buy a crowbar and that's legal. You can even talk to your friend and say, we should stop those people from voting. And that's legal because you're not taking any steps towards actually doing it. But if you talk to your friend and say, we should stop some people from voting, let's go buy some crowbars. And then you go buy crowbars, probably illegal
Right.
right?
Now you're engaged in a conspiracy to deprive people of their rights.
Yeah, this is like
Yeah.
pretty simple stuff, and like Trump is not being indicted because he said the election is stolen. Trump is being indicted because he took a whole shitload of affirmative steps
Right.
to try to overturn the valid results of the election.
Right.
It's not that complicated.
Right. And you know, like the indictment, there are details in the indictment that are so good on this point, and one of them is um that they were like often lying to the fraudulent electors, their alternate slates of electors, and telling them
Yeah.
like, oh, don't worry, this isn't anything illegal because we'll only use this in the case that like our current pending litigation is successful. And
Right.
in one
It's they
case,
were trying to say that it was like
this is a
the
backstop.
alternate right, the alternate electors were like, in case the litigation pans out, we will need this,
Right.
right? That's what they represented to the electors and, per the indictment, to the RNC.
Yeah, to Ronna McDaniel and the Republican National Committee. Two states, I think it was New Mexico and one other, maybe Pennsylvania, I forget which, like actually had in writing this like only to be used in case of like successful litigation. The
Yeah,
other
yeah.
five did not. Obviously, they used them anyway. Uh, but like they have an email apparently where somebody says like we better file a petition for cert at the Supreme Court, otherwise this will look like treason. and and not because they didn't want to be committing something that looks like treason or is in any colloquial sense actually treason. It's because they didn't want the electors to realize what they were doing was, colloquially speaking, treasonous, right? They're like,
Right.
we have these dupes that we need to engage in our treasonous, seditious plot. We need to file a cert petition so that they feel okay about their involvement in this and don't realize how nefarious it is. Like the knowledge of illegality, the knowledge of fraudulent intent, like it's all there. So they're, it's clear that the prosecutors have done like a very thorough job and tried to design this indictment in a way to um like sidestep a lot of thorny issues.
Yeah.
The charges, like for example, a lot of people, there was a big argument about whether Trump's speech on January 6th could be incitement to
Incitement. Yeah.
violence, which would be a very thorny First Amendment legal issue. And they just avoid that altogether and use it more as in support of the last three charges, which are conspiracy to obstruct, obstruction, and conspiracy to deprive rights, as a sort of, this was part of how they tried to pressure Pence, right? So this was
Yeah.
part of the conspiracy, was creating violence and uncertainty in order to make their pitch to Pence and Republican congressmen more
Yeah.
persuasive, which
In a
is
way where you don't actually need to believe what Trump said was incitement to violence
right.
for their charge to make sense.
Exactly. It's just one little piece of a larger plot, which I think is accurate, but also like clearly designed. Like this is a very lean indictment that was clearly designed to just really focus in on their knowledge, their conduct, and avoid tricky issues.
Yeah. I mean, it's also worth
impressive.
noting that like the obstructing an official proceeding charge, they've already gotten January 6th rioters on this charge, many of them.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that they've gotten anyone with conspiracy. It's quite possible. It would certainly be a different conspiracy because this one is one that Trump's involved in. But this is a charge that they have successfully brought against various rioters for obstructing the work of Congress on January 6th.
Yeah.
So it's just like sort of uncontroversial in this context.
Somebody in the chat says, when lefties go on about treason, I zone out. I want to be clear. Treason was their word, not mine. That was the word of, I think, Kenneth Chesbro.
Yeah. Is it
In,
Cheesebro or Chesbro?
I don't know. But that unless you think a Trump flunky in the DOJ is a lefty, you should take it up with him. Not
Yeah.
me.
That said, we will be executing Donald Trump for treason. So
Don't
that's indictment number 4. It's coming.
I also saw someone in the chat earlier saying they were concerned about deprivation of rights, the final claim that the court would not recognize the right to vote in this context. That's not something to worry about. This is a very long and storied history in the courts. It was used just a few months ago to convict I forget the guy's real name, but a guy who on Twitter went by the name Ricky Vaughn, who was in the 2016 election, was telling Hillary Clinton supporters that they could vote by social media.
Right.
And the same thing was being used.
Classic troll, by the way, but the boy's in federal prison. So
yeah.
watch
exactly.
out.
Yeah.
And I do think it's worth talking about the conspiracy against rights charge, because this is something that Michael Tracy complained about. Let me pull.
Yes. Let's see the tweet.
All right. In what I think was the dumbest tweet of yesterday. Give me 1 second here. Yeah. This is famous journalist Michael Tracy, one of the all-time dumbest motherfuckers.
So stupid.
So stupid. I was just reading his feed all day. It was so fun. It was the best. Quote, "This latest indictment is completely insane. They have literally charged Trump under the Civil Rights Act of 1866.
Bum, bum, bum.
Which I guess you're supposed to be like, that's too old.
That's
be
so outdated.
A law that you apply.
Yeah.
Like, right. So to put this in perspective, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 was a law passed to protect freed slaves after the Civil War. What actually follows is several enforcement acts. They're called in the early 1870s. So you get the Civil Rights Act, the 14th Amendment is passed, and then the 15th Amendment, and then you have the enforcement acts. I believe that's the chronological order, though I'm not sure.
The first enforcement act is 1870,
right?
And then there are many more.
Right, but you have 3 in rapid succession, and I believe I can't remember which one it is that subsumes this charge, but these remain to this day the primary vehicle for individuals, especially enforcing their civil rights. Section 1980, which is how you sue for civil damages when your constitutional rights are violated, comes from the enforcement acts. So this is something that is used.
1980 or 1983?
Sorry, 1983. Yes.
Yeah.
This is something that is used constantly.
Yes.
It's something that anyone who has like a passing familiarity with constitutional law or history is like very aware of. And so someone just being like, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, it's so on the nose. You're a fucking schmuck, dude. You don't have to tweet about it. Like, you don't have to talk about it.
If you don't know anything, you can just shut up.
Just shut the fuck up, bro. You don't need to talk about it. It blows my mind how many of these absolute losers just feel like they need to like thread this stuff every time it happens. Like, you're not a lawyer, which you can not be a lawyer and still have something to say about this stuff. But you can't not be a lawyer and also not understand politics or history and then do tweet threads. That you need one of the three, I feel like, is required.
Also
But
very funny in the context of people saying that this violates the First Amendment, which is
right,
significantly older.
way older,
Way
way
older.
older. Only we will only enforce the freshest laws,
That's right.
Like straight off the presses. Those are the hot laws that we will enforce.
It's
Fucking
also
schmuck,
like,
dude. Yeah. But sorry, maybe you're gonna say this, but I also want to point out that like there's this law makes perfect sense in historical context.
yeah,
And
that's what I was going to say.
okay,
This is
good.
this is what the law is for, right? Like, this is like, after the Civil War, they passed this law so they could punish insurrectionists, right? This is like, could it be more appropriate? Like,
Yeah.
you pointed out to me earlier this afternoon, there were people flying Confederate flags at January 6th.
Right.
Like, this is the
Like
law.
the same insurrectionists in some sense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was thinking about this recently, which is like, when could you say the Confederates stopped fighting the war? And I think the answer is never. Like, certainly
Right.
not after the ceasefire, because right, that's the whole point of Juneteenth, right? They maintained
Yeah.
slaves. Certainly not after that, when they fought Reconstruction, and there had to be military occupation. Certainly not after that, with the construction of Jim Crow and segregation. And I just don't think there's any evidence after the dismantling of Jim Crow that they've stopped fighting it, right? Like,
Right.
Reagan announced his presidency at the site of a fucking race massacre,
Right.
and like, just on and on and on. You can draw a straight line from the Confederacy to the modern Republican Party.
But like even without that, even without the fact that it's like sort of the same political project, has there ever been a better time to apply this law
Than an actual
than
insurrection.
an actual insurrection?
Like,
It's like the
change the
first
outcome
time
of
it's
an election.
happened since the Civil War, so like it
Yeah.
sort of makes more sense than it has ever made.
Yes.
But go off Michael Tracy, absolute dipshit.
And like, I support the Manhattan DA's efforts, and it looks like the Fulton County DA is also engaged in, it will soon be prosecuting Trump. It seems like we will soon have a fourth indictment in a fourth state. But if there was ever a more appropriate entity, it's the DOJ, which was created at the same time in the late 1860s, early 1870s, to enforce these laws and protect freed slaves and punish the holdout, lost cause insurrectionists. Like, that's the point of that's the
Right.
original meaning of the DOJ, the original purpose of the DOJ. And here we have the modern DOJ using the Civil Rights Act of 1866 to go after insurrectionists who were literally trying to overthrow the government and flying the Confederate battle flag in the Capitol. It is like unbelievable historical resonance. And
Yeah. It's so funny. There's something so fucking funny about I don't want to keep going on about how Michael Tracy is stupid, but I've just been reading his Twitter feed all day, and it is he grasps so few things, and
yeah.
he was running through the indictment like paragraph by paragraph, being like, "This isn't tantamount to establishing mens rea," and it's like, no, but that's one of
Many
like
facts.
many paragraphs.
Yeah,
What are
this
you
is like
talking about,
90,
dude?
100. It's a 45-page dense indictment.
He
Indictments are
really
usually a
believes.
breeze, and this was
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I mean, indictments don't always spell out facts at all. This is a speaking indictment, which does. But he goes through like I truly believe that what he thinks, that if you show that each individual paragraph doesn't establish all the elements of the crime, then like when you're done the indictment, you've proven that it never establishes. It's so good, man. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna show another Tracy tweet.
That's good. The one thing I missed from Twitter was, and this is literally the only thing, the only time in the last month where I've been like, man, I wish I was still on Twitter, was I really enjoyed pulling up his old tweet from, I think, 2012, being like, in September 2012, being like, if Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich could declare in all 50 states on a unity ticket today, they
Yeah,
would win.
yeah.
They would win.
Incredible
Incredible,
brain, dude.
incredible
Incredible
brain.
brain.
Yeah.
All right, here he goes. Jack Smith, who's the leading the prosecution here. Jack Smith told the TV cameras that Trump was being charged with, quote, conspiring to disenfranchise voters. He knows disenfranchise in common parlance means deprive of the ability to vote. Trump deprived no one's ability to vote. 2020 election was the highest turnout since 1900.
What?
Bro,
What?
bro. So this is something that he said numerous times, and I saw from a couple other people where they were like, how could he interfere with someone's right to vote? They were able to cast their ballots.
They
And it's
voted.
like, yeah, great point.
Yeah.
Great point. So if someone casts their ballot and then I burn the box they put it in,
Right.
I didn't interfere with their right to vote. That's
If
your
instead of putting it in an optical scanner, you just took it and put it into a shredder, are you saying that you haven't interfered with their right to vote? Like,
just absolute jelly for brains, nothing going on, dude. Just the slowest people on earth.
yeah.
It's wild.
This is also a matter of black letter Supreme Court law, by the way, that you can deprive someone of the right to vote after the fact by looking to substitute their votes or disqualify their votes or hide them or trash them or whatever. Like this has all been decided. There's like a line of cases on this.
Which, like, I mean, it's also just straight up common sense. Like,
yeah.
There's no functional difference between obstructing someone from physically voting and making their vote irrelevant after the fact.
Right.
It's not. There's no meaningful difference between those two things. All right, we should probably talk about the most prominent quote unquote defense of Trump, one that has I think like something like merit to it, at least compared to the other sort of theories of his defense, which is the concept of sincerity as defense. The idea that Trump truly believes that he won the election, truly believes all his claims about fraud, and therefore you cannot hit him with a conspiracy charge because he lacks the mens rea. He doesn't have the intent, right? Now, it's not that there's nothing to this, because this is part of the intent analysis, but I think most people are getting this wrong. The intent needs to be with respect to the conspiracies.
Right.
Not the higher goal, right? The conspiracy was to defraud the United States, to obstruct an official proceeding. And let's stick with obstructing an official proceeding because it's the simplest, right? The January 6th proceeding.
Right.
So the conspiracy is to obstruct an official proceeding, right? The intent is to obstruct the proceeding. It doesn't matter if he thinks he's doing so in service of a moral good because he thinks he really won it. His intent is still to undermine the official proceeding, and he knows that his intent is to undermine an official proceeding. He knows that he is violating the law, and that, according to the Supreme Court in Arthur Anderson, is enough. And so I think people are getting it wrong. It's not irrelevant that whether he believes that the actual fraud happened and that he is the rightful winner of the election or whatever. But it's not entirely fully relevant either. The conspiracy is to do the things. And he did those things, conspired to do those things, knowing that they were against the law. That's the conspiracy.
Right. Like he has to know and understand that the alternate electors that they're submitting aren't the official slate of electors, which he clearly did. It would be impossible not to know. But believing that you won and those electors should be your electors is a separate question, right?
Right.
That's not the question. The question is, are these the electors that have emerged from the legal processes around the election? And that answer is clearly no, and that is spelled out in detail in the indictment. And it's like pretty clear he had that
Right.
knowledge and that state of mind. The other thing is they throw in some lines from him that suggest, like they have some people willing to testify. Like he said to Mark Milley, who was a general, who was like a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I believe, about some like foreign affairs issue. Like on January 3rd, I think he said something like, "Yeah, we'll just leave that to the next guy," or something.
Yeah.
Like understanding his position was, I'm leaving the Oval Office because I lost the election, but
Right.
nonetheless looking to retain power.
He also, I mean, I think this gives a lot of sort of like credit to the idea that he is just like fully convinced, right?
Yeah,
And there's a lot of evidence that that's not really true,
yeah.
right? There's
Him calling
like,
Sidney Powell crazy.
right, he calls Sidney Powell crazy. He calls Mike Pence too honest.
Mhm.
There are a lot of little indicators that he knows more or less what's up. Does he feel like accepting it out loud? No, he finds it
Yeah,
humiliating, but
right.
he more or less knows. Um, so like even if you're convinced that this legal theory works, I don't think it works for Donald Trump. And if you think it does, I was tweeting about this earlier. You get to a point where it's sort of like, yeah, fraud is legal for narcissists. You
Right.
know,
Yeah,
like if you're incapable of accepting that you've ever done something wrong, then it's legal for you to do fraud because you'll never have the mens rea.
yeah.
I don't personally think that's the law. I think what's actually happening is that the right is setting up an insanity defense in name, so not in name only, an insanity defense in function
Right,
without actually saying it, where they're like, come on, this guy is unhinged.
right.
Every single
He can't be
person,
responsible for his actions. He's a
right,
crazy person.
every person who has any vision into the actual facts told him that this wasn't happening, and he still believed it's happening anyway. He should be the next president as well.
Yeah.
It's just sort of, I first of all, someone said insanity is their Hail Mary. No, I would love for them to plead insanity
It
here. It's
would be
best case
incredible.
scenario. Best
Incredible.
case scenario.
While he's
Um,
the Republican nominee, he's been
he just
pleading
gets he gets
insanity in court. I
he
can't
gets
believe it.
remanded to a mental health facility.
Oh man. He's
Oh,
like
what a
in
rock.
Bellevue.
Right,
um
right.
uh fuck. I had a thought, but I lost it.
Classic Michael, folks.
That's somebody asked if there's a 5-4 Discord. There's not. There's a Slack, but it's for our Patreon subscribers.
Pony up, kids.
We are in it though, so we regularly engage there.
We do be in it.
Yeah.
So I'll talk until you think of your thing. Yeah, I think that the sincerity thing, the idea that he is a true believer, I think this is what's going to haunt the case,
Mm,
because I think that the intent requirement, which is having corrupt intent, that's the requirement you need here for these conspiracy charges. What the court has said is that if you truly believe that you're not breaking the law, and perhaps that is enough to defeat intent. So it does feel like that's where his defense has to go. Should he win on that? Absolutely not. Could you
right.
convince a jury? Maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe, it's quite possible. So
Oh, I wanted to mention
that's
some
probably
other.
their angle. Yeah.
I wanted to mention some other things you're seeing from the right right now. One of them is that DC is not the proper venue for this because it's
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
overwhelmingly black and democratic that he could never get a fair trial there.
This is what
Um,
Ron DeSantis came out with, right?
yes, yeah, Ron DeSantis said it. So Aaron Siberium or whatever, however the fuck you say his
Yeah,
name, the
that buff,
DEI,
yeah,
yeah,
the
the same
the
guy who 2 days ago was like, "Don't get yourself in chats where they
the
say the
guy
N
whose
word."
advice to young he said his advice to young conservatives was like, "Don't join group chats where everyone uses the N-word."
A
He
real
publicly said that
problem.
was his advice
This is
to
a
young
re-
conservatives.
just a classic
Alone.
problem we all run into. We're like, another N-word chat.
If only an older mentor had told me not to join the N-word chats. My career would be in a completely different place.
But yeah, that's not happening. Like everything happened to DC. It's gonna be in
Yeah.
DC.
Yeah, we should. I mean, the DeSantis. First of all, can we just take a quick step back on DeSantis? Some of the most cucked behavior I've ever seen,
Yes.
bro. Your primary opponent is getting indicted for
Yeah.
something like so close to just straight up sedition, and you're just like coming out being like, everyone should stop being mean to Donald Trump. Like,
Yeah.
then just don't run, dude. If
Yeah.
you're not gonna pounce when your opponent is getting absolutely fucked in federal court, then what are you doing? You don't need the run. You like I've said this in like different forms before, but like in order to run in a Republican primary, you need to like subjugate yourself to Donald Trump. And that doesn't work when you're running against Donald Trump.
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense. Just
Yeah.
the most cucked behavior of all time.
It's he's so pathetic. I can't believe he won in a state as big as Florida. Like if I were a journalist in Florida, I would be embarrassed that like I allowed this to happen. Like how did this guy win public office?
He's a cuck. He doesn't understand venue.
No.
Can't get any worse. Can't get any worse. Atul, we already discussed the Michael Tracy theory of of the Civil Rights Act. Yeah, I guess the concern in the conservatives' mind is just like DC's too liberal. He's going to pull an unfavorable jury, and he's going to get smoked. And that's that. I'm excited for voir dire. I think that the jury selection is going to be great. You need to find people who aren't that familiar with like Donald Trump and January 6th. Like your ideal juror has never heard of Donald Trump and has never heard of January 6th and learns everything during the trial and is like, "Ooh,
whoa,
that
guy
guy
was
from
president?"
The Apprentice."
Like 12 people who've been in comas for the last decade.
Right. Oh, it's going to be so good. The whole trial is going to be like, I sort of wonder whether we have the capability from a media apparatus perspective to produce another OJ trial. But like, this is going to be it if anything ever was. Right.
Yeah. And like I do want to say, I want to be like sincere and earnest for a second. Like, I think this is arguably the most important criminal prosecution in the history of the country. Like,
yeah, that does feel right. Maybe there's some shit from the early republic that is escaping my mind, but
yeah, but this is like literally like this is the moment where we decide whether there are real consequences for organizing to overthrow the government. And that's like, if you care about democracy at all, that's important, right? That's like really important. So I think that's worth noting. That being said, it'll be great viewing, man. It's going to be so fun.
So good.
And the J6 committee was really entertaining. It was.
Yeah, right.
It was.
I do want to bring up another thing, which is it makes a lot of sense here for Trump to throw his lawyers under the bus. Almost all the co-conspirators are lawyers.
Yeah.
You've got, you've got, what is it? 4 lawyers and 1. Are there 5 or 6 co-conspirators?
There's 6.
So you've got 5. I think it's 5 lawyers and 1 political consultant.
Even the political consultant was an attorney. He just wasn't acting as an attorney. Boris Epstein.
Right. So
I think it's all lawyers. I think 4 of them are Federal Society members, though, right? It's Giuliani, Eastman, Clark, and Powell are all Federal Society.
Right. And if I'm Donald Trump, Right. What you're trying to do is foster an aura of good faith, right? So it's
Mhm.
like this whole like sincere, like I sincerely believed it, and I was trying to take steps to get me, the rightful winner of the election, um, back in office as I deserve to be. How do you do that? You talk to the lawyers and you ask them how to do it, and
Right.
then you do what they tell you.
Yeah.
Um, So there's an avenue here for him to throw all of his lawyers directly under the bus. He does have some problems there. You need to show that you were like reasonably relying on your lawyers. Meanwhile,
Mhm.
he's like on the record saying Sidney Powell's crazy.
Right.
you know,
And then
not
nonetheless spreading her shit. Like,
yeah, and
yeah.
then just repeating what she said. So, uphill battle, but like probably one of the moves. And if that starts to happen, then maybe some of the co-conspirators roll, right? Because why
Yeah.
not? If you're Sidney Powell and Donald Trump is in court blaming you, then maybe you start talking to the feds, right? Why
Yeah.
not?
And he's already started this, right? There was a piece, I think, yesterday morning about how he's like, I took a lot of advice from Giuliani and John Eastman and Sidney Powell, and they're my lawyers. What are you going to do? I also don't find this persuasive, like at all. Like,
No, the
I
lawyer.
mean,
I
like,
mean, it's the in reality, and like let's put the legal merits aside here, or like what happens in court aside. In reality, the opposite is true. Donald Trump was directing the lawyers, and they were doing whatever the fuck he said, and they were embarrassing themselves in the process. And the fact that they were doing what he said is what made their actions so embarrassing.
right there's a great bit in the indictment where it's like Jeff Clark, who's one of the unindicted as of yet, soon to be indicted co-conspirators, was like in like civil DOJ and not particularly senior, and like he's having direct meetings with Donald Trump, and then like reporting back to the acting AG, who is, I believe, Whitaker, and Whitaker and his deputy are like, don't talk to Donald Trump. Do not talk to the White House. Do not talk to the
Yeah, yeah,
president. That's not your place. You have to clear it with us. And then like the next morning, he's like again talking to Donald Trump. And then like sending them an email with like draft language about how the election was corrupt. And he's like, just send this to Georgia. Just send this email to Georgia. And they're like, no, fuck off and stop talking to Donald Trump, right? Like the whole thing, you can't turn around and be like, I'll just listen to my lawyers. You had lawyers in like White House counsel being like, this is crazy and illegal. Like,
yeah.
no, he was ignoring them and listening to whatever mid-level rando would tell him what he wanted to hear, and then cutting out their superiors and working
Right.
directly with them. And then he threatened Whitaker that like he's like, maybe I'll just make Clark acting AG so that he'll send this
Right.
email to
And the only reason he didn't do it, it seems, is that the word came back like everyone in the DOJ is going to resign if you do that.
Yes, exactly. Like this isn't going to work because the mass resignations will signal to the states that this email that you're transmitting to them is crap, right?
Yeah.
And your whole thing will fall apart.
Right. There's a natural desire in the like MAGA right to just become a cuck to Trump.
Yes.
It's part of their brain chemistry. When
Yeah.
they meet him, they must cuck themselves
Yeah.
before him.
Yeah.
It's important to them. Like these people are ruining their careers, and it
Jeff Clark
happens
was almost acting
continuously.
attorney general for 3
Right.
days.
You like
You
it's
see
like
the golden ring
what
there.
is
You're
he
like, oh,
promising them? What is he promising them privately where they're like, I know he's screwed over every person before me, but what if I'm daddy's special boy, And they believe it. They like they move forward on like the off chance that perhaps Donald Trump will favor them, and his light shining upon them briefly is what they work for at all times. It's like remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. It shocks me. I don't understand. It's just from a pure self-interest
Yeah.
perspective.
Sorry, I just saw the offensive comments and I banned the anti-Semite.
We do be banning anti-Semites
right,
up in here.
right.
Our position has always been pro-Semite.
Pro-Semite, right.
Absolutely.
As a Semitic man myself.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right.
The very early in the conversation, people were asking about my shirt, and I'm wearing it for a specific reason, so I want to comment. In The Godfather, the orange is a symbolic precursor of a character's death, and I am I am wearing this because ultimately it is my sincere belief that Donald Trump will be uh, tried, convicted, sentenced to death
Okay.
for his seditious activity, and executed. Yeah.
The maximum sentence for the first count, conspiracy to defraud the U.S.,
Yeah.
is 5 years. The obstruction and conspiracy to obstruct are 20 years. And the last one, deprivation of rights, is I think 10 years. But and they don't allege this in the indictment, and so I don't think they are seeking to prove it at trial. But if someone dies in the course of your efforts at deprivation of rights, life sentence or capital punishment are statutorily available sentences. So, in theory, considering Officer Sicknick and whoever and Ashley, what's her face?
Yeah.
Ashley Babbitt died on January 6th during the riot. In theory, they could seek the death penalty for the deprivation of rights.
I'm on the record.
I don't support the death penalty myself,
No,
and I would not
I'm
support them pursuing it myself.
me. Look, I'm saddened to wear this shirt. I don't think it's a good thing.
I'm pro-life and take no pleasure in reporting this.
Absolutely. No, there is something to be said about how funny it would be to just see the attempt, like the moment of like recognition and fear in Donald Trump's brain when someone is like, they're seeking the death penalty.
It would be incredible. It would be worth it just to see his face. Just to see his face.
Just that, like, it would never actually happen. There's like the chance of it is so close to zero. Like the chance of him being struck by lightning is just as high. There's no,
right.
But like just that one split second, of him
beads
being like
of sweat like appearing on his forehead, the distant stare. Oh my god,
sir, they are pursuing the death penalty. He has like a brief chat with his lawyer where it's like, is it electric chair? Oh shit. Oh man, there's something about that just gets me. It's just like the glimmer of a consequence so severe in the brain of a man who has never experienced any consequences for anything. Yeah, there's something deeply poetic about it. And it is that's why the moment where he got COVID was so enthralling for everyone, right? Where it's like, is this a consequence for Donald Trump? Like, is it a consequence? And like, we all knew that it was probably not going to be a real consequence that he experienced, but like the premise is inherently fascinating. Let me say, yeah.
We haven't talked about the judge. She's very good. Former public defender. Very sharp, supposedly very fair, but has
also
taken
a black woman, which I only say because the right is going to lose their minds. They're going to lose their minds.
Yes. She's taken January 6 cases very seriously, and I believe she has departed from DOJ recommendations on sentencing upwards and levied
Yeah.
heavier sentences.
Which is rare in the January 6th proceedings, where most I'm not sure about most, but in a lot of cases, judges have gone below the recommended sentences for the
Right.
January 6th rioters, which is really the only disappointment for the DOJ. They've gotten a ton of convictions, but the sentences haven't been as severe as they were seeking. But she's gone above.
Yeah. The judges do get to, I mean, assuming he's convicted, the judges do get to decide sentencing. That's
Right.
within there. I mean, there's certain things that have to go to the jury. Like I believe in federal cases, capital stuff has to go to the jury. I'm not sure on that. Some states that's true. Some states it's not.
Yeah.
I don't think,
By the way, a lot of people have made fun of us for saying that we're legal experts. I can name literally dozens of laws. Okay.
yeah.
I can tell you the contents of almost all of those laws. So do not question our expertise. It is vast.
Look, man,
Vast and deep.
We are no less legal experts than any of the talking heads you see on cable TV, any of the people who write opinions in all the major papers. My former admin law prof, Jed Sugarman, gets page space all the time, including on these prosecutions. He said he thought New York's prosecution of Donald Trump was constitutionally infirm and a violation of due process because it was insufficiently detailed, unaware that New York has mandatory discovery laws wherein the prosecution had already turned over all of the evidence it was marshaling against Donald Trump to his team. So that's the level of expertise you can expect from the New York Times op-ed page.
Supreme Court Justice Sam Alito just said publicly that Congress cannot regulate the Supreme Court, which
that there's no
is not
provision
true.
in the Constitution.
There's a provision. There are multiple provisions, but there's at least one expressly saying that with the word regulate that Congress can regulate the Supreme Court
such regulations
in the context of their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So, which I could have told you.
Yes.
Before Sam Alito,
because we've talked a lot about court reform, so we're familiar with like the.
All right. So why are we legal experts? We are literally more knowledgeable about the Constitution than Sam Alito on the Supreme Court.
Law professors, pundits, people who write in the New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, people who appear on cable news, and Supreme Court justices themselves. So we know more than that.
Also, someone asked about maritime law. Guess what? Not a joke. when I was a lawyer, I once got put on a maritime law case, forced to take it, and then I just was like forced to become a bit of a maritime law guy for like multiple years at a law firm. So yeah, I do know some things about maritime law. Thank you. Nice try to joke at finding a part of an area of the law where we jokingly might not be good at, but I actually am. So
it's incredible when you like clerk or when you work at big law firms, you just become expert in like such arcane areas. I know a lot about successor liability in corporate civil actions.
Dude, that's so much more boring than maritime law. I'm sorry.
I know a lot about money laundering. I know a lot about
that's a good
international money laundering. How it's done, how to untangle it, all that stuff.
Someone asked where Rhiannon is. On a fucking beach in Jamaica is where Rhiannon is.
She's fucking living it up. She's having a great time. Good for her.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Have we ever made a citizen's arrest? No, but we will be doing it to Donald Trump. The arc of our podcast bends towards the citizen's arrest of Donald Trump by the hosts.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
All right. I don't know if is there anything else about the indictment to talk about? I mean, I think I've heard a lot of people just sort of go through it, talk about how monumental it is. I mean, it is easy in the context of Trump, who's so anomalous and has sort of like forced us to get accustomed to anomaly, to forget that this is like preposterous. Like the scheme is to functionally nullify the very plainly valid election results
Mhm.
and suppress resistance by force, by military force, after it's done. Um, and it's weird to think that this is just like a thing you hear on MSNBC for a few minutes and then like turn off the TV and continue making dinner or whatever. Like
Yeah.
we are in a wild time in American history, and this trial I think should be nuts. Like it
Yeah.
should be a spectacle unlike anything we've ever really seen in American politics.
Um, Somebody asks if the GOP senators and congressmen involved in January 6th, whether they could be charged as well. Um, Here's what I'd say. Um, I think a wider ranging indictment with more sort of um, questionable, not questionable, but like challengeable legal theories
Yeah.
could rope in like Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever, right? Like if they were trying to get him on incitement, uh, for example, like her saying, "Come to the Capitol on January 6th. We can't let there be a peaceful transfer of power." Something that's a matter of public record would be just as clearly incitement as his rally on the Capitol itself. But they're not doing that, right? They are clearly narrowing their focus in order to maximize their chances of
Right.
conviction.
And
And
possibly to move fast, right? I mean,
yeah, they are
they don't name the co-conspirators as defendants, which in a normal case would of course be.
yeah, they got dealt a shit hand by Garland here, right? Like pretty
Yeah.
clearly, like this has been well reported at this point that uh they didn't even look into Trump for like over a year. Their hand was essentially forced by both January 6th committee being like a wildly successful and provocative piece of political theater, and Trump um, refusing to return all these like sensitive classified documents where they're
My
like
man.
we can't ignore this any longer, right? Like people are angry, congressmen are angry, he's keeping classified documents, we have to act. But they got dealt a shit hand as a result, because they had to rush this. Smith wasn't appointed till I think January of this year,
Yep.
and he was inheriting, an investigation that had been slow walked for 2 years, and um, putting this together in this amount of time, I think, is impressive and is like a credit to
Yeah.
him that he is like the first powerful person who has been very serious about the laws apply to Donald Trump, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that that's true. And that includes making sure not only that we try him for his many crimes, but that we do so in time for there be political accountability, for it to happen before the election, for all that other shit, because congressmen were too cowardly to do impeachment. Like he's cleaning up so many people's messes, so many people's messes. I think it's pretty clear that the Fulton County DA and the Manhattan DA were dragging their feet too, until it became clear that Jack Smith was like going to actually do something. Then they were like, well, shit. Like,
Right.
we don't want to look like assholes who've been sitting here with their thumbs up our ass for 2 years and getting lapped by a guy who just got on this beat like a month ago. So we better get real about this too. And all of a sudden, the investigatory grand jury in Atlanta is coming to a close and they're recommending charges. And Alan Bragg, after declining to bring charges and getting excoriated in public by his ADAs, is like, all right, we're going to bring charges, and bringing very bread and butter New York DA charges. Like that false, the false report stuff is like
Right.
they do that stuff all the time in
Yeah.
all sorts of contexts. So it's like they're like, okay, we can't be the only ones dragging our feet here anymore. But it's like really like finally somebody was like, yeah, I'm not a fucking coward. like all of you, and I'm going to take this seriously. And now it's happening. And once these things start, they have like their own momentum. They're very hard to stop, I think.
Yeah. We're in the most interesting phase of this. Ever since January 6th, there's been this sort of like gaping chasm in American politics and law of like, what do we do about January 6th? Because it doesn't really have any precedent. And
Yeah.
that puts us in a weird position as I say us as a governmental apparatus, right?
Hmm.
Put aside the political differences. Is this an impeachment thing? Is it a criminal thing? Is it both? What do you do when you run into weird political resistance that has no actual basis in reality, right? On impeachment. Um, what do you do from a criminal perspective when 30% of the from a criminal law perspective, from a criminal prosecution perspective, when 30% of the country is ready to go for war for this dumb
Right.
motherfucker, right? Um, these are all sort of like unprecedented problems. And I guess that in that context, I feel somewhat sympathetic and feel like maybe there's some justification for it taking this long. But it has been 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And
For crimes that happened out in the open on national television
right.
over the
That
period of months.
right. And
Like
it's hard not to look at the whole thing and think Merrick Garland sucks. Jesus. Like
yeah,
like
what a
like
fucking doormat, right?
just a loser, like a
Yeah.
natural loser, a
Yeah.
guy who doesn't understand the moment he lives in. And
Yeah.
if he did, it could be like a historically
It's just a
good.
historic figure. Yeah. Like
Yeah, yeah,
a
exactly. Just
name
like
you remember, right? Like
right, a guy that
Woodward
in
and
50
Bernstein or
years
something.
kids might learn his name in, sophomore year history or whatever. But
Yeah.
no, instead he's just this like loser who drags his feet to the point where like Trump will be literally on trial in criminal court for the attempted overthrow of the United States government during the 2024 election. Like,
Yeah.
what an unbelievable spectacle this is
Yes.
going to be. I
Yeah.
kind of can't wait. It is the end of the republic, but it is also I do want to watch.
I will say the delay is good in one sense and only one sense, I think. The only sense in which it's good is that if Trump tries to do like interlocutory appeal or whatever and tries to delay this and send it up to the Supreme Court and kill it before it even happens, I don't think the Supreme Court is going to want to make, should the Trump indictment go forward, be like the
Yeah.
central question of the 2024 election. So I think they will be very wary to drag this out further and like let it wait till after the election, because then you're just sending up the bat signal to every
Yeah.
resist lib in the fucking country that they need to vote or Jack Smith will be fired and all these
Yeah.
charges will be dropped.
Mike, I'm gonna run to the bathroom and refresh my drink, and then maybe we wrap up talking about the Supreme Court, because I do think this could get there in
Oh,
some
absolutely.
form, and maybe even like for sure will in some form, some part of
Mhm.
it. So I'll be right back.
All right, great. I'll look at chat and answer some questions from chat. Let's see. Thoughts on media's response to the indictment? My thoughts are it's been mixed. Obviously, right-wing media has been a bit of a joke for the most part. I think there's some truth to the idea that New York Times has been like scared of just like admitting what Trump did was like tantamount to insurrection. You see them using a lot of euphemisms around this stuff. But I think they've learned a lot. I don't want to give them credit because God, they have fucked up so much in the last 20 plus years. but there has been some decent responses to this, and like part of my preparation for this was reading some pretty good pieces about it. I will say Politico had a piece today where they basically reported on a pretty anodyne exchange between the trial court judge, the district court judge that this case was assigned to, and a public defender. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her name. But this exchange she had with the public defender where he was just like, how are you doing? And she was clearly like, I'm not sure. He asked how she slept and she said not well, and blah blah blah, just like clearly indicating she's a little stressed about all this. I think her safety is pretty obviously in danger. um or her safety is in question, rather. She's pretty obviously in danger. And I imagine that's scary for her. But it also seems like Politico is just like posting someone up in her courthouse to report on anything interesting that's going on, and is just like, this is just a basic polite exchange between her and an attorney working like a case. And it's like, I don't know, man. Like the spectacle is already starting, right? Like the spectacle is already underway. And it's just going to get worse and worse as we get closer to trial. Let's see what else. Michael, can you give me the old data from Mike Dicta? I don't know what that means, the old data. Like, what data? Is Congress rushing to pass a bill to protect her? I will say, there was a federal district judge who was murdered by someone disgruntled, I think last year, New Jersey. And part of the whole Supreme Court protection bill included, my recollection is included stuff for the lower court judges as well. So in this case, that's good.
All right. So I guess the natural final thought here is like, is this going to reach the Supreme Court in some form?
Very possible.
Because we are a Supreme Court podcast, are we not? Yeah, I think the answer is like probably yes.
Yeah.
The only question is just how important is the issue that reaches the Supreme Court. I don't think it's crazy to think that the issue of Trump's state of mind comes up to the Supreme Court. It's been litigated to the level of the Supreme Court before, not that long ago. I think 2005 was the last time that the concept of corrupt intent was interpreted by the court. They were relatively clear in that case, so maybe it doesn't need to be litigated, but it depends on the court's appetite, right? I think that they could, depending on the political context, see an opportunity or see something that they very much want to pass on. But the problem for them is that we're in DC, which means that we're in the DC circuit, which is liberal. Makes it a little more likely that they want to fuck around a little bit, stick their hands in there, fiddle with some stuff, see how it goes, which is so exciting. As the proprietors of a Supreme Court podcast, it's hard not to be like, ooh, it would be great. It would be great to see some shit elevated. Interlocutory appeal, or even more exciting, post-conviction.
Post-conviction.
Some post-conviction appeals. Oh my God, dude. Just Sam Alito just like writing a concurrence about how much he loves Donald Trump. I would lose my mind. It would what else can you want as a Supreme Court podcast? It just feels perfect. And I think that it's very likely that this reaches the court in some way. There are so many novel issues. This stuff doesn't happen. Like, yes, these charges have been brought before. people have been convicted related to January 6th on some of these charges, but the context of a president trying to execute a almost completely novel scheme to sort of like intercept the electoral college,
Right.
it it's unique, and uniqueness brings unique legal questions, and unique legal questions bring the Supreme Court. So
Yeah.
I think it's coming.
Yeah. Oh, I did want to respond to one other shitty right-wing defense of Trump, which is that like I don't even know how this started, but some of them have like latched onto language in like wire fraud cases that
Yeah.
like defrauding has to include like pecuniary damage or property loss. And that is just not the case when it comes to defrauding the United States. Again, this is a very long and well-established line of cases that I don't think the Supreme Court is interested in revisiting. Just
Yeah.
thinking about things they're interested in, not interested in revisiting. You do not have to show that like someone lost money on January 6th to prove that Trump intended to defraud the United States. Like that is so fucking stupid.
Right.
Some of the defenses of this are like just like embarrassing how stupid they are. Yeah, I think like if you look at how they've handled like congressional subpoenas, grand jury subpoenas, like the Mazars case, you know, they often they delayed a lot of resolution until he left office or until committees disbanded, power changed hands. So the cases were somewhat moot by changing political circumstances. I do think because of the delay here, that's not as easy a tactic for them to take. All that would do is make themselves, in the case itself, like a central election issue, which I don't know that they want. But yeah, it's interesting. There are definitely issues here for them to decide to weigh in on, and like in the middle of Biden term 2 with Trump in federal prison, like doing post conviction relief could be absolutely fascinating. It would be very fun.
Yeah.
And we could get some.
I would love to see the court get like all into habeas rights and shit.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All of a sudden they've learned the value of defendants' rights, or at least Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas have.
Yeah. All right. I think the last thing I want to say about all of this is that as historical as it is, as serious as it is, as a matter for like, there's the survival of our republic, right? As like a system of relatively cooperative institutions. This is some of the funniest shit you'll ever get. Donald Trump, a schmuck by any definition, is about to be on trial for something approximating his life. That's inherently funny. Important not to forget that. Important not to forget that this is funny. Remember why you enjoy life, Remember why you follow these things in the first place, for these moments where you get a former game show host turned president convicted potentially for something adjacent to sedition. This is what politics is all about, baby.
That's might even get put to death. Can't rule it out.
You cannot rule out
capital punishment's available if Jack Smith decides to seek it. It's there.
Which we don't support.
Pro life, take no pleasure.
Yeah. Look, we put out many episodes of the podcast saying that we are opposed to capital punishment. Stand by it. Absolutely. That said, the Grim Reaper looms over Donald Trump, and
yeah,
and that's that.
I
just a fact.
I will say, to the question we ask in the description of this video, is Donald Trump going to prison? I
What do you think?
I think the answer is yes. I think he's probably
Ooh.
dying in prison. I think he's dying in prison.
Oh God, that's the
I know.
dream.
I know. This is like, it goes against everything we know about how power is treated in this country. But I feel like after the FBI raids,
right? I mean,
after
there are competing centers of power here.
yes, the FBI's raided his home. He's being prosecuted by multiple different entities. Like, I think at some point you have to adjust your priors, right? Your prior held beliefs on this, and be like, okay, somewhere, some point in time, the culture shifted, and important people who make these decisions decided he's no longer untouchable. And and that
perhaps that he is a threat to those who wield institutional power, right?
That's right.
He and many of his allies wield institutional power themselves, but there is more than one center of institutional power. And I do think that creates the possibility for the first time in like modern American history of a president really seeing the inside of a federal prison.
Be incredible.
I do think I would probably, if I'm so close to 50-50 on this, on whether he sees jail. I guess I'll take the other side just for fun and say that, like, this is very vibes based, but I see the tunnel from his perspective. I see the argument that I'm just a guy who thought he won the election. And I see a credulous media apparatus. I see a uninformed jury willing to believe that this is a man who just thought he won the election, and maybe that's his way through. I think that's the other side one way or another. I'm really not convinced, but I do think that is the other side. And it's obviously less funny, so I don't want it to happen. I think the funniest outcome here is Trump in prison for like 15 years, like just enough where it's like, is he gonna die in prison? And then we all get to wait it out. And if he gets released, that's funny too. He's like 88. That's funny. That 88, like just your almost 90-year-old Trump getting released from prison in 2030. 2038.
Can you imagine?
That's funny.
That's very funny. That's very funny.
We'll all be dying in the climate apocalypse, and then there'll be like a news story like Trump gets released today, and you just see him looking like absolute shit. Get walked out of prison.
So somebody mentioned the whole meme. I'd like to see Donnie wiggle out of this, but that's kind of my point. Is like, I think that with that mindset, you never would have expected Mar-a-Lago to be raided. You never would have expected him to be indicted by anybody, let alone by the Fulton County DA, the Manhattan DA, and federal prosecutors. Like, at some point in time, you have to update your beliefs about the world, or you're not really like thinking critically. It's just a pose, right? Like, I don't know. I try to just engage with the world as it is, and oftentimes that leads to cynicism. But I don't know how you look at the last 6 months and be cynical about people in power trying to make Donald Trump actually feel consequences for his actions. Like, it's clearly something has changed, and people have decided it's like politically expedient and important for them to put the screws to him. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, he has experienced consequences to a degree that I don't think most people would have anticipated.
Yeah, already. Just getting indicted is like beyond what anybody would have guessed.
I mean, having your like estate raided as a former president, it's not nothing. And I think that his whole term sort of like skewed our perception of what is normal.
Yeah.
But these are outlier occurrences. The indictment is an outlier occurrence, and it's not wrong to sort of reassess what is producing these outlier occurrences and
Right.
start to think a little more reasonably about what's likely in the future.
Right.
If you can get hit with multiple indictments, if you can get your home raided by the feds and
Yeah.
be busted with classified information, which, by the way, if you believe in a deep state, surely they have some interest
Yeah.
in in
No, I
seeing this shit kept secret.
yeah.
I mean, the Overton window has shifted a bit, and the stakes for institutional power have changed.
Yeah.
They are much higher than they used to be, and I think that weighs towards it being a little more likely that Trump sees
Yeah.
this so.
And for all the complaints about the jury pool that we were dismissing, I will say, I think that the DC and New York and Atlanta, Fulton County juries, for that matter, are bad jury pools, not because they will be so biased as to just want to convict Trump, but that you're very less likely to find the type of
Yeah.
lone holdout who thinks the election was stolen from him and will basically do jury nullification on his behalf.
Yeah.
Which is what he needs, I think.
Yeah.
From
It's
a
not crazy
juror
to think that he could find it in 3 juries, considering the percentage of the population that these people occupy.
Yeah, but 3 juries in New York, Atlanta, and DC.
I agree. Yeah,
Very different.
It's a different story.
Different story.
Someone asked, do we think he gets tried and sentenced before the election? I think that's sort of one of the big questions. I
Yeah.
think the answer is, I mean, tried, yeah, the trial will most certainly, I shouldn't say most certainly, but almost certainly begin before the election. It's hard not to look at the timing and think that the trial's ongoing during
It's very
much of
possible.
the election season, or possibly the election itself.
Or
Um,
he's convicted, but it's like on appeal,
right.
which would be incredible.
The timing is about to be
Just
good as hell, dude. It's about to be so good.
yes. I mean, the district court judge, I forget her name, Tunka, something like that.
I forgot her name too. Yeah.
I think it's Anya. What's her name? Meet Tanya Chutkan. Tanya Chutkan. I already said that. I'm gonna butcher her name, and I am. But she's clearly like trying to do this on a very expedited basis, right? Like they think they have a hearing on scheduling tomorrow. I imagine she's going to clear her docket and try to make this happen as quick as possible while still allowing for all the appropriate time for answers and responses and motions and all that. But that stuff takes time. So I wouldn't be surprised if the actual trial doesn't happen until next year when we are in the primaries. And
Yeah. I mean, look, we might see some dates in the coming weeks. Who knows?
Yeah.
At
They're
least
supposed
for
to
some.
be talking, at least talking preliminary scheduling.
Yeah, exactly.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I mean, the timing is
unbelievable.
It's gonna be good.
Yeah.
It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. We could very readily go into an election day with someone, with one of the candidates on trial for trying to overthrow the prior election.
It's unreal. It's unreal. Thank you, Merrick Garland.
It's so
making this
good.
happen,
Merrick, my man. Thank you. Thank you for respecting process, Merrick. You really did a great job.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man. But yeah.
Do we think he'll get hit with contempt? I actually think the answer to that is probably no. It depends. But Trump knows how to be sued.
Yes.
And this translates relatively closely. He knows how to be in a courtroom. And that's one of the sort of things that cuts against the angle that Trump is like a schmuck, like an unknowing schmuck who just thought he won the election and whatever. You ever see him in court? it's like a different dude. Like, ever see him in deposition, he's like careful. He's like, dodgy. It's a totally different vibe. He's someone who sort of like knows his audience in those settings. And
Yeah,
yeah, I think he'll keep quiet and maybe put the occasional post on Truth Social, and that'll be that.
yeah, um, yeah. I also am very excited to see the coming indictments for Rudy Giuliani, um, Sidney
Fried.
Powell,
Say
Jeff
what you want
Clark,
about Donald Trump. I don't know what's going to happen to Donald Trump. Rudy Giuliani is going down,
dying in
going
prison.
down. Sidney Powell is going down because there's no way Trump wins
Yeah,
without throwing them under the bus. And if he goes down, they also got to go down too.
yeah,
They should be plotting out their flight to a country with no extradition
yeah.
treaty ASAP. That's the move. That's one move. Rudy, if you're listening, hop on a flight, big buddy. tell him you're going on vacation and then disappear on a boat.
Oh, I see Josh in the chat from Blue Sky. He was the first person I saw who called that co-conspirator 6 would be Boris Epstein. Props to Josh. Follow him on Blue Sky.
That's a sharp call.
It is. He called it yesterday before anybody else had it. I think it's Josh Friedman. Is that Josh? Post your Blue Sky in the chat. Everybody should follow you. Very sharp.
Yeah. I was still praying. I mean, it pretty clearly wasn't Ginny Thomas, but I was still praying for Ginny Thomas.
Yeah.
It was one of those situations where you're like, what would make this even better? Just a little bit of Ginny.
Just a little bit of Ginny. I thought it was Roger Stone. And was very excited for that.
I thought I actually, that was my guess too, was that it was Roger Stone.
Yeah. But Ginny would have been incredible.
Ginny is best case scenario. Unfortunately, she's too much of a loser to matter in these situations.
Yes. She's more of a gadfly than even an activist, let alone an influential consultant. That's the thing.
Her usefulness to the movement is that she's Clarence's wife, right?
Yes.
It's that she's not a mover and shaker. Like, Mark Meadows will take her calls, will field her texts about Biden being sent to Guantanamo, and he'll be like, "That's great, Jenny. Thank you. Love you. You're doing awesome." But he's not like listening to her. He's not taking direction. He's not bringing her into meetings because she's a loser. She's a moron. All right, we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah, I think so.
It's been a bit.
An hour and 40 minutes of streaming is, I think, enough.
That's the most anyone can do.
Yeah.
And anyone who does 10 hours of streaming or whatever, I want you folks to know, is an actual without feelings psychopath. That is
or on
for a normal person. Yeah. I would accept that as well. Thanks for joining us. I think we just wanted to talk about this, and I think we got everything off our chest.
We had originally planned to talk about the shitty Connor Friedersdorf Atlantic piece and maybe Rudy's other legal troubles, but the indictment is just, I mean, we could just talk about it forever. So
it's just so interesting, and it doesn't. I would love to pivot into talking about how Connor Friedersdorf is the one of the
Michael Tracy
minds
of the printed media.
That's right. Yeah, like a high level Michael Tracy sort of figure.
Right.
Yeah. But it would be a step down from talking about the former president being sent to Guantanamo Bay, where he will die. Right. So thanks for joining us, folks. And we'll see what happens in this, but maybe, if there are developments in this, I think we'll probably hop on stream in the future. And if, Sam Alito does a grocery store shooting or whatever, we'll do a special stream for that too.
Yeah, that's right.
We love you guys, and we'll see you around.
Yep. Bye, everybody.